Hello and welcome back to Paddock and Track, the show where we bring you news on and off the track. I'm Max, and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host Amaan.
What's up, guys?
And today we are back with the Belgian Grand Prix. So, jumping right into it, a very good race, I would say. Some of it was a little boring, as I feel like Spa produces often. Because
of how long the track is.
Yeah, so it's not in terms of laps. It's not a very long race. It's only 44 laps, but it feels like it's a very long race.
It is, yeah.
So in terms of qualifying, Leclerc put up a good qualifying. However, really, he was not P1, even though on the charts he was P1. When you actually look at it in terms of timing, Max Verstappen was P1 as he had a penalty for taking extra power unit elements. That really hindered Verstappen's qualifying, of course. And it allowed Perez to sort of out-qualify his teammate in a sense, but obviously not really because Perez was still, in terms of lap time, slower than Verstappen.
Mm-hmm.
But Perez up in P2 is still definitely a good look for him.
Yeah.
Especially as we know he's had some bad races, especially when it comes to qualifying, but even race pace has not been great for him.
Yeah.
If we're being honest with ourselves, his race pace still was not very good this race. However, his qualifying showed somewhat of his older form that we should expect from a Red Bull driver. So that was definitely good for him.
Definitely.
Also seeing Hamilton up in P3. We've talked about the Mercedes performance before, and we'll definitely talk about it this episode, but it's getting better. We're seeing clear improvements. Especially improvements over Red Bull, sorry.
Yeah.
And so we see Russell down in 6th, so not the best result, but considering that the Mercedes kind of sandwiched the two McLarens in between, that's definitely a result that they'll be happy with. I think that they should be satisfied with.
For McLaren, we see Piastri 5, Russell 6. I mean, sorry, Norris 4, the Piastri 5. I mean, we've seen the McLarens also be like one of the fastest cars on the grid, but seeing them here in 4 and 5 shows that the other competition has caught up.
Yeah.
And it's definitely exciting to see what these other teams can do to also catch that McLaren car.
And I feel like part of Ferrari coming towards the top, of course, Sainz is all the way down in P7. So, yes, they both made Q3, but we also know that Leclerc tends to be pretty good over one lap.
Yeah.
So his qualifying pace usually is pretty good. So it makes sense to see him up there in P1 again. Technically, based on lap time, he would have been P2. But still, it would have been a good qualifying from him.
Yes.
But yeah, like you said, clearly some people are starting to catch up. Such as Williams, who got a car into Q3, actually.
Yes.
So that's definitely somewhat of an improvement. Albon down in P10, so it's still not like he was high up in Q3, but he did make Q3, so that's still something to speak for. That's definitely something that's at least somewhat notable. Clearly, they're doing upgrades. They're doing work on that car to make it a more competitive car.
Yeah.
And I think that'll help them going forward because they still are pretty much at the bottom. Not quite at the bottom, but pretty much at the bottom of the constructors' standings.
Yeah. Rounding out Q3, we have Fernando Alonso, who secured 8th, and then Esteban Ocon in 9th in that Alpine, who is just sporting their new Deadpool livery.
Yeah, I really like this livery, actually.
Yes.
I think it was a really good way to sort of show the cameo, I guess. It makes sense because Ryan Reynolds is a big he owns a large stake of the company. But yeah, so it was a nice, I thought it was a good livery. They had the yellow fireproofs on too. And the red suits over. It was a good livery. Plus the red looks, there was actually paint on the car, which was good.
Yeah,
because that Alpine car it lacks many things, including performance, but one of the big things it lacks is paint.
Well, I mean, I feel like the performance got to Ocon. He's got P9.
Yeah, so that's somewhat of an improvement, and Gasly in P12, so it's not terrible for those two.
No.
But obviously, again, still not great.
Yeah, but considering where they were at the beginning of the season, I think they're doing pretty well for themselves.
Yeah. And then otherwise, Zhou Guanyu also with a 3-place grid penalty. So he's down in P19, and Yuki Tsunoda forced to start from the back of the grid because he took a lot of power unit elements, which I feel like we've seen a weird trend of.
Yeah.
So maybe RB is having some problems in terms of their wear and tear on their engine. We'll see if that continues to affect them because definitely it's really affecting Yuki Tsunoda. I feel like less so Ricardo. But yeah. And then, of course, as we mentioned a little bit before, Verstappen with a 10-place grid penalty. for using extra power unit parts. Again, once you hit those park primary rules, which is basically after the practice sessions, you're not allowed to change engine parts or things like that. And we saw Verstappen was unhappy with his performance in past races, so I think they were hoping to improve that performance. But it did cost them in terms of starting position.
Well, I didn't really think it was all that bad because he did still secure pole.
Yeah.
Pole before he got the grid place penalty. But I don't think it was all that bad. But yeah, I mean, P11 they put the parts in to try to improve the car.
Yeah. So getting into the race start was pretty chaotic for a lot of people, including Sergio Perez, who was quickly. It was somewhat contested, to be fair to Perez, but Hamilton was immediately on Perez, and pretty much once we got to turn 1, Hamilton was past Perez.
Yeah.
So not a great start from Perez. Not as bad though as Lando Norris. Another time in the saga of Lando Norris's poor starts. This one was less of a poor turn 1 and more of simply a poor start.
Yeah, I mean, at least it wasn't from pole this time, but still it's from P4 too.
Yeah.
It's not a good look for, especially for Norris, who's trying to catch Verstappen. I mean, this has been a trend for many races now. And at this point, I don't know if he has what it takes to actually catch him.
Well, especially you compare him, obviously, as his teammate, you can compare him directly to Oscar Piastri.
Yeah.
And Piastri had a much, much better start. I mean, we saw Lando go back basically 3 positions, all the way down to 7th place. And Piastri was doing really good. He was challenging Perez as he was losing time there to Hamilton. And during that fight with Hamilton, he was catching Perez. We saw Piastri have a very good start. If nothing else, he was maintaining position.
Definitely.
Yes.
Throughout the race, he was maintaining his position.
He had some fights with Russell at the beginning, but he held his own against Russell in arguably what looked like at this weekend the McLaren was slower than the Mercedes. He was really holding his own again, and then you compare him to Perez, and he did, I think, better than Perez in terms of race start against a Mercedes. They're both fighting a Mercedes, and comparing him directly to his teammate, he did much better than his teammate.
Yeah, I mean, we've also seen it before where the spotlight's right now on Norris, but you got to also look at how Piastri's been performing. This season, he's been performing exponentially better than anyone could have imagined. This is his only second season.
Yeah.
He's only going to get better from here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane how much he's done in 1.5 years in F1.
I think a lot of us make the mention that Lando Norris probably will be a world champion at some point, and I do believe that. I think that's definitely possible, but I think you cannot overlook Oscar Piastri.
Yeah.
He is a very, very good driver, and like you said, it's only his 2nd season in Formula 1. If this is what he can do in 2 seasons' time, yes, his car is very, very good at this point. Well, I don't know about very, very good, but it's pretty good. But still, he's doing so well, and even comparing him to his teammate, which a lot of people feel like is a championship contender at this point.
Yeah.
He has so much more consistency that I think Piastri is, honestly, I feel like McLaren wants to focus resources on Norris, and I think part of that is they feel bad because they've had Norris for so long and they haven't been able to give him a good car. But really, I feel like what they should be focusing resources on, and I know the Lando fans will hate me for this, but they should be focusing on Oscar Piastri.
Definitely.
Who has been a more consistent and a more composed driver under pressure.
And yeah, I mean, if they spend time developing him more, I feel like he would be the next actual defined world champion. Right now, Norris has his flaws, and again, Lando has been in F1 for quite a decent amount of time, several seasons, and we've seen how he's only won 2 races his entire career, and it's this season when he actually had a good car. Piastri also won his first race this season too, so it took Lando many years. Granted, he had a worse car back then, but still, if you still need skill to win a race. We've seen it time and time again. Lando has botched all his starts. Most of his starts. And that's just on the driver. The car can only go take you so far. And it's been proven with Lando Norris.
Yeah, and we will, not to give a little bit of a spoiler here, but we will get to Lando's 2nd win here in a little bit. I promise we are working on those next episodes. We are still a little behind. We will get there, though, I swear. Yeah. And like you're saying, I think Norris needs to figure out his consistency. First, he needs to become... I think we've seen him become a more composed driver. We've talked about this. We've seen him become a more mature driver over the years. He's definitely developed well, and this season especially, he's doing a lot better than previous seasons.
Yeah.
Again, a large part of that is due to his car. But yeah, he still has more development to go. He has more improvement that he needs to make. We're not necessarily saying that Piastri is a better driver, but we're saying that Piastri is more consistent, which makes him in some ways a better driver when you think of purely gaining points, right? So that's, I think, a good quality in a driver that you really want. As George Russell once said, in Formula One, consistency is key.
Yep.
So, that's something that's really important to note.
Anyway.
And then, so anyways, getting back into that race after that little tangent. So Verstappen was very quick to catch up to Norris. By lap 2, Verstappen was right on his tail, and that's one of the tricky parts, I think, of Spa, is that if you are close to somebody, especially coming out of turn 1, there's such a long straight as you go through Eau Rouge and those corners.
Yeah.
You have so much time. You have the DRS to help you, and so that's really a great overtaking spot, especially with, again, slipstream and DRS. And with these energy recovery systems that these cars have now, you can really make passes on through those times.
Yes.
And so Verstappen was very quickly able to catch up to Norris. Because, and of course, like we know Verstappen was starting from pretty far back. And Lando dropped a couple spots, right? So, but still, Verstappen was very quick to pass a couple of those, in his case, back markers. They were not necessarily back markers, but when you're Max Verstappen, kind of everyone is back markers.
And that's also what separates a world champion from the rest of them. So he started from P11, that doesn't faze him, so he's starting to gain those places back and just try to get into the points as much as possible.
Yeah. And then we saw Hamilton flying past Leclerc on lap 3. Again,
the Mercedes pace is just insane during this race.
Yeah, the Mercedes really was the best car this weekend. We've talked about in the past, was it McLaren, was it Red Bull? We're starting to see, I feel like, a greater divide between McLaren and Red Bull, but this race, it was clear that Mercedes was on top. Mercedes had the best car. And that's really something that's interesting to note, that we've seen really the best car sort of going back and forth. I feel like at this point it's more so between Mercedes and McLaren.
Yeah.
Ferrari is somewhat out of the question. They're still around, but I feel like they're not really in contention for someone who has the best car. And at this point, I think Red Bull is starting to lose their grip on that. And I think really we had talked about, is Adrian Newey really the biggest impact on Red Bull's performance? I think we're starting to see that maybe he does actually have a big impact.
Yeah.
And him not being there and not being able to help the team develop, I think we're seeing how that's starting to cost them.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it before. Adrian Newey is insane mind that has made multiple championship winning cars, including that RB19.
Yeah, so I think that might be starting to hurt them, but this weekend, really, Mercedes had the fastest car, they had the best pace, and that really helped them to get this win that they were able to get today.
Yeah.
And then we also see, sadly, Zhou Guanyu. It was just a little sad to watch. Losing power on lap 3, then he managed to find power again, and then they just had to retire the car. Very unfortunate for him, as he's not been lucky recently. Those Saubers have not been fast.
Not at all. I mean, they have been dead in the water, mainly at the bottom of the grid, just all the time. Like, when you have Oliver Behrman have more points than your entire team, it's not going well.
Yeah, well, and considering that Sauber still has 0 points, and we are this far into the season, it's, like you said, it's not a good look. We're, this is I believe we're over halfway into the season.
Yeah. It's
not a good look for Sauber to be where they are with 0 points at this point.
No.
And then we also see Verstappen. I thought it was very interesting. He really undercut Norris. I mean, it did sort of end up working in some ways. It was a bold strategy because he pitted pretty early. I would say decently early. Because he was kind of stuck behind Norris at this point. He pitted pretty early compared to Norris, but McLaren really seemed to keep Norris out for a long time.
Yeah.
He stayed out, I felt like, for a really long time, and he was losing a lot of time to Verstappen. And of course, part of that gamble that McLaren is taking is that they will come out and on those fresh tires, they will be faster.
Yeah.
So they have that tire offset on Verstappen. But at the same time, he was losing a lot of time to Verstappen. I really felt like it would have been more beneficial and possibly helped McLaren and Lando get into a higher position if they had pitted Lando earlier to cover up Max Verstappen.
I mean, I think this has just been a Personally, I've been noticing it. McLaren has been keeping Norris out for longer than they should.
Yeah.
Especially these past few races, and I don't know if it's just their reliance on the car being fast, but it's not been working that well either for them.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen McLaren sometimes on some races those cars really seem to come alive on old tires.
Yes, we've
but
seen that.
This race, I don't feel like we saw that as much. In past races, we've really seen it. Like, it's like somehow they flip a switch when they're like really late in their stint and their car is just a rocket.
Yeah.
But that did not happen this race. So I think McLaren needs to either figure out what changed that their car's not like that anymore, or they need to just plan for that and pit cars earlier. Because I feel like they're really losing time to essentially at this point their biggest competitor, which is Red Bull.
Yes.
We also saw Piastri fighting with Perez, and Piastri seemed to have a lot more pace than Perez. So this is a hard comparison again because we don't know really if it's the car, the Red Bull car, or if it's Perez being Perez. I feel like at this point, it seemed to me more so in this race like it was the car. Perez, we saw again, he qualified P2, kind of P3 based off raw pace,
and then he's been falling down.
Since
that start.
So. I mean, he still seemed to have more pace than he has recently, but seeing Piastri really overtake him very easily. Of course, Perez is a very long time driver in Formula 1 against Piastri, who we've talked about, again, raced basically 1.5 seasons.
Yeah.
Is not a good look for Perez. I still don't really understand why his contract has been extended.
Yeah.
But I suppose I'm not the one who's making the decisions for Red Bull.
No, not at all.
But either way, we saw Perez saying that the Red Bull was very slow down the straights. So again, is that another situation where the Red Bull just doesn't seem to be a fast car? And is his complaint valid? I don't know. Supposedly Red Bull is having problems too with their DRS system.
Yeah.
So that could be playing into it.
For this race, I think it was valid for Perez to say that the Red Bull was slow. It's just that it did really look slow. Yes, Perez's pace has been much better than previous races. I mean, much better than that.
Yeah.
But I think at this point, we can see that the Red Bull is just not performing at where they should be as the top of the constructors, where they still stand. I think right now I think McLaren's just has a better car right now than them. And yes, Piastri is a very skilled driver too, so I feel like that paired with his car can just get past Perez just pretty easily.
And I feel like this is one of those things, to go off on a little tangent here, I don't know if we've discussed this before, but this is one of the things with changing regulations every 4 years creates somewhat of a difficult situation for these teams, because there's one team that'll like master the regulations, right? For these 4 years so far, especially the last 2 years, it had been Red Bull, right?
Yeah.
Red Bull was very, very good. In 2022, they had less of the dominance that they had in 23, but still, in 22, they were very strong. 23, of course, we know they were super duper strong, winning every race except Singapore last year.
Yeah.
But that's the problem. So now that we actually see teams catching up to Red Bull and actually finally being faster,
these regulation changes are just going to mess it up again.
Yeah, so we don't know, of course, who will come out on top, right? It could be McLaren. For all we know, it could be Visa Cash App RB. Who knows, right? Anybody could come out on top next when we get to 2026. But that's the problem, is that then they'll have mastered that recipe.
Yeah.
They'll keep it for probably at least 1 year, if not 2. And then by the time people catch up again, you have new regulations.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of those things that kind of really affects the sport and makes it difficult to have big competition. I feel like the FIA keeps trying to do these regulation changes because they're saying that they want to encourage more competition.
But they already have the competition right now.
Now we have the competition, and then they're going to change up the regulations. So, yes, there's less. You really get like 3 teams that are good, right?
Yes.
Right now we're seeing Mercedes, McLaren, and Red Bull. It's kind of who we expect to be on top, except Ferrari, right? Ferrari's not really in that mix.
Usually the teams that have the deepest pockets that do the best.
Yeah.
So, yes. So, as we know, those are the teams that will be on top eventually whenever new regulations come out, whenever it's like next year, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it's always going to be those teams unless they have regulations that actually help like the entire grid where all the teams can actually benefit from those regulations.
Yeah, and this is one of the things too that it will be interesting to see new teams coming in, like Audi coming in. It'll be interesting to see how they will handle those new regulations, but I just think it's annoying sometimes when you finally get a good season to watch, a very interesting season. It was the same thing in 2021, right? 2021 was a little bit different. Because it was really more of a competition between Red Bull and Mercedes.
Yeah.
Yes, there were other winners in there. I mean, there were like the random wins, like Monza. We saw McLaren coming out 1-2. There were very random ones, but those were because Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton were just kind of being stupid.
Yeah, they were like colliding with each other.
If we're being honest with ourselves, yeah, that was kind of the main reason.
Yeah.
Right, and so. But it's kind of, yeah, like I said, it's frustrating because you're like, once you finally get a good season that's interesting to watch, then the regulations switch up and then it's kind of boring for a season or two.
I mean, I can see where the FIA is also coming from. I mean, we saw Mercedes dominate for like 7 years.
A while.
For like the 2010s decade.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I see where they're coming from, but like now it's like not working.
Yeah.
Like, as much. Like one team is going to... Yeah, like you said before, one team is gonna come out, figure out the regulations by like year 2,
yeah,
and then by year like 4, everyone else can figure it out, and then by year 5 they change the regulations.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, yeah, and you could keep going back in time and say, well, this person had this like run of wins. Like you talk about Sebastian Vettel, right? For 4 years straight, he was, I mean, you know, back to back to back, right, and to back again, I guess. You know, Sebastian Vettel was on top.
Yeah.
But I mean, and then you look now, right? We have 3 years in a row where Max Verstappen has been the champion, but. I mean, 2021 was a little bit of a different story, right? But still, right, you get these, like, long stints of, like, this one team has dominance. So it's not every year that it's, like, the first two are really boring and then the later two get exciting, right? There are some times where just one team is just really, really good. But having new regulations, especially in a time period like now where there is a lot of competition, we've had so many different race winners and so many different teams doing really well. It kind of makes it harder to watch once you get those new regulations.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the
back to the
race.
So we also saw Russell making a very tricky one-stop work. We'll get into this. Actually, no, we can get into it right now. So Russell he made a very bold choice, I think, to go to the one-stop. Spa is a tricky race to do the one-stop on because those tires really get punished, right?
Definitely.
There's a lot of elevation change, especially going up Eau Rouge and things like that.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of elevation change, and it's really it's tricky for a driver to handle and manage tires for that long, which is why it's so heartbreaking that George Russell was disqualified from the Belgian Grand Prix. So it was because his car was below the minimum weight requirement. So his car was 796.5 kilograms. The minimum weight required for the car is 798 kilograms. So this man was 1.5 kilograms under the weight minimum. That's so terrible.
Yeah, I mean, he drove a really good race. Coming from behind too. Like he was not at the top for whatever means from before. So like he like worked his way up there.
Yeah, and he drove a brilliant race. Again, like we said, making that one-stop work is tricky, and he managed to do it. He was really the only driver who did that successfully, and pretty much one of the only drivers that actually did that.
Yeah.
And so it's sad that he got disqualified. He really deserved that race win because he did such a good job. At the end, it was tight with Hamilton. He was fighting right at the end there, and I did appreciate that Mercedes was not like trying to keep them from fighting each other.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we saw from like Ferrari in a couple past races now, thinking like Monza of 2023, where they really just let the two fight and they were like, okay, just don't be stupid. I really like that they're not just like they're not doing team orders or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, also the thing is, we also have Russell also in front too. I mean, Hamilton's also an outgoing member of Mercedes too. So I feel like they would just let him fight it out only because that one's outgoing and one's just staying with the team. So I feel like that's also helps because I'm just basing this off of like how McLaren just has like the team orders with like Norris and Piastri, just because they're keeping both the drivers with them as well. So
I think that's a big part of it. But yeah, so very, very, very unfortunate for George Russell because he did really drive a great race and he had to give up that first place, which is heartbreaking for him, of course.
Anyway, moving on. Piastri, when he was coming into the pits, he did really something interesting. So when he got to the pits, he almost kills his front jack, man.
I don't know about killed. It's a little bit. It's a little bit of a stretch, but he came in hot.
He came in hot and ran into him.
Real props to the guy on the front jack because he hung on there.
He did.
With there's a lot of force coming straight at him. I mean, you think about it when you watch them go down the pits, it looks so slow, but they're going 80 kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
So it's really not slow. It looks slow, but if you're thinking in your car, if you're driving that fast, that doesn't feel slow when you're like.
And it's a human
car.
It's a human.
And it's just a guy.
Hit by
but to be fair to him, he absorbed that impact and he got the car up in the air. And yes, it was a slow stop. It was like 4.4 seconds.
Yeah.
Which is not great, and it wasn't optimal for what they would have wanted. But such a good work by him that he really he did his job. He got that car up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, that also proves like how well these pit crews are like trained too. I mean, maybe not all of them, maybe not Kick Saubers, but for McLaren, everyone's else's pit teams. I mean, they are doing a really good job like doing the work for the teams. I mean, they're maybe like a small part that no one really looks at, but their jobs are important too.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes they definitely get overlooked. And yeah, we've seen a lot of teams. Some teams I feel like recently we've noted that they've sort of it looks like fallen behind recently in terms of stop times. It seems like they've kind of fallen off. But yeah, it was really good from that Jackman. And he really helped Piastri's race to not be totally entirely ruined. And then again, like we said, the Hamilton-Russell and sort of ending up being Piastri fight was really, really close. It was a very, very close finishing margin. Very exciting to watch right there at the end.
Yeah.
It really made that last like 3 or so laps of the race very interesting.
I mean, we see Russell cross the finish line, but it's a shame that he had to get disqualified later on.
Yeah, so then that ended up messing up the finishing order a little bit. So Hamilton ends up P1. We didn't really talk about him a lot, I guess. I feel like we end up doing that a lot because I feel like Hamilton ends up being somewhat unremarkable, I feel like, during the race. But he drove a good race, to be fair to him. He had good
great
pace.
pace.
We said, again, we've talked about the Mercedes pace was really good here. Hamilton really did drive a good race, and he was very close to Russell there at the end.
Yeah.
Piastri coming in second then after the disqualification. So, again, like we said, a very good race by him. He's really shown his composure and his ability to run a good race in a car that's maybe not the best one.
Yeah.
And then Leclerc picking up P3 to finish up that podium. So, a little bit of a kind of random from Leclerc almost.
Yeah.
He did a good job managing his tires and things like that, but he kind of didn't make much of an impact on this race.
I think the second most impressive drive is Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
Because he started from P11 and now he ended up in P4, eventually passing Norris, proving that the undercut did work in the end.
Yeah.
Which is what world champion caliber performance by Max Verstappen.
Yeah, so Norris all the way down I suppose not all the way down, but down in P5 behind Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
So not where he would have hoped to have finished if he wants to really take the fight to him in terms of the constructors and the drivers' standings. And then the rest of the grid was somewhat as per usual. Ricciardo picking up some points, as well as Ocon in P9, Ricciardo P10. So those two picking up points for their teams, which will definitely be good, especially for Alpine, who's really kind of not had a lot of points. So those 2 points will help them out. And then Albon down in P12, so he was not able to capitalize on that good starting position, which is a shame for Williams. They definitely need those points. So. That's not great for them. Logan Sargent down in P17, so Williams not really not having the performance they've hoped for. No. We've already talked about Sargent being replaced, so
there's not much to say about that.
Yeah, there's not much else to say. But overall, especially towards the end, the beginning and the end, I feel like of this race were very, very interesting to watch. Very exciting, provided a lot of good racing action. So yeah, I think we had a good time watching it, and I hope you guys had a good time listening to this. And we'll see you for the next one.
Goodbye.